Well, as you've heard already earlier today, in 1943 in this city, Prime Minister Mackenzie King of Canada hosted a meeting with President Roosevelt and Winston Churchill to sign what's called the Quebec Accord. And the Quebec Accord was a secret agreement for a three-nation agreement to work together on the world's first atomic bombs. And the reason Canada was in the picture was because Canada had an abandoned, well, temporarily shut down anyway, radium mine in the Northwest Territories. And as a result of that, the radium had been processed at Port Hope, Ontario, which meant that there was uranium residues just sitting there in Port Hope. It was the only easily accessible source of uranium at that time. All the European and African sources were under Nazi control. Czechoslovakia, Belgium, and so on. So this cooperation got Canada in on the ground floor of the nuclear weapons and nuclear energy, and you might say that this meeting was really the official start of the uranium industry, because before that there were no uranium mines per se. Uranium was just a byproduct of other types of mines. This agreement also led to a secret wartime laboratory being set up on Mount Royal in Montreal, where methods for separating and producing plutonium were investigated by the top scientists from France, from Britain, and from some other European countries with assistance of Canadians. And in fact, those men who worked at that secret laboratory went back to form the foundation of the French nuclear weapons program and the British nuclear weapons program. And also the French and British reprocessing programs for separating plutonium, much of the expertise of which was worked out at that Montreal lab. Oh, am I pointing at the wrong thing? I can't do this. Okay. What's going on? Uh-oh. I don't understand what's happening here. There we go. Well, the first two bombs, as we know, that were actually used were Little Boy, dropped on the city of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, made from highly enriched uranium, and Fat Man, the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki using a uranium derivative called plutonium. Plutonium doesn't exist in nature, but it's produced from uranium. In fact, every atom of plutonium starts off as an atom of uranium. For this reason, I think of uranium as a shapeshifter. It's a material which takes on different characteristics, different identities, really. And you might say that plutonium is a new role for uranium. This bomb, of course, killed almost 100,000 people in very short order, and caused a lot of suffering later as well, and ushered in the dread of the atomic age and the threat of nuclear annihilation through nuclear weapons. In fact, this is a bronze statue of the Buddha that was melted by the Hiroshima A-bomb blast. Robert Del Tredici, who took these photographs and who is a colleague of mine, he's coming here today, he likes this photo because he thinks that it represents the fact that even the gods are not immune from this kind of madness. On November 15th, 1945, just 3 months after the bombings, the three countries that were involved in the World War II atomic bomb project issued a joint declaration, and it had three prophetic insights in it. First of all, that nuclear weapons provide a mean of destruction for which there can be no adequate military defense, and therefore fundamentally alters the concept of warfare. Secondly, no system of safeguards will of itself provide an effective guarantee against the production of atomic weapons. Think of that in terms of our safeguards agreements that we have today. It was recognized way back then that no system of safeguards can really be truly effective. And thirdly, atomic bombs are weapons in the employment of which no single nation can, in fact, have a monopoly. In other words, sooner or later, either nobody has them or everybody has them. The statement went on to say that The United Nations should find a way of entirely eliminating the use of atomic energy for destructive purposes and promoting its use for industrial and humanitarian purposes. Brave thoughts, and based upon perhaps a misconception that you can, in fact, have one without the other. The question is, can you really have a peaceful nuclear energy program whereby you are enriching uranium, whereby you are producing plutonium on a regular basis, and expect that there will be no problem in preventing nuclear weapons proliferation? So this is perhaps the fundamental dilemma that we find ourselves in ever since. Now, the uses of, even despite this statement that we should eliminate nuclear weapons altogether, Canada went on for the next 20 years to build up a booming uranium industry in Canada, and all of it was sold for nuclear weapons. In fact, in 1959, the uranium exports from Canada was the fourth most significant economic export from Canada in 1959 was uranium. And it was all for nuclear weapons. It was all sold under U.S. military contracts. In 1965, sorry, I just back to the previous one. In 1965, the military contracts had dried up already. The military contracts started drying up around 1959, actually. And around 1965, in the year 1965, Prime Minister Pearson, who, by the way, was the member of Parliament from Elliott Lake, declared that henceforth no Canadian uranium would be sold for weapons purposes. It would only be sold for peaceful purposes. The difficulty was that there weren't peaceful purposes that could readily fill the gap. And as a result, many of these uranium mining enterprises went out of business, and the Canadian government, in order to save the mining industry, established a stockpiling program whereby they purchased the uranium and stockpiled it. And in 1972, in order to overcome the resistance of the market, Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, together with 3 other countries and Rio Tinto Zinc, established a secret international price-fixing cartel, complete with phony rigged bidding system by which they boosted the price of uranium from $4 a pound to almost $40 a pound, and the uranium industry was back in business. There were subsequent lawsuits over this, but they were all dismissed. So here we are. This is a picture of Canada more or less today. It's not entirely up to date. This is about 15 years old, but it's still remarkably fresh. Most of it is historical. Up in the very top, you see Great Bear Lake. And on the east arm of the Great Bear Lake, that was where Port Radium was. And that's where the original uranium came from for our contribution to the world's first atomic bombs. But since that time, mines opened up in northern Saskatchewan and the Northwest Territories and in the Elliott Lake area of Ontario, just above Georgian Bay. And all of that material was again sold for bombs up until 1965. And then in 1965, the peaceful program was initiated, and some years later, new mines started opening up once again. The modern age of uranium mining in Canada is considered to begin around 1976, which is when the Cluff Lake Board of Inquiry into uranium mining in Saskatchewan was established. It was the first time that Canadians had ever had an opportunity to have a public hearing about uranium mining. This was more than 20 years after uranium had already gone into countless nuclear weapons. All of that uranium went to Port Hope, Ontario, which had been a radium refinery actually designed and built by a man named Pochon, who was a co-worker of Marie Curie in France and who was brought over for that precise purpose. And that facility was subsequently used to, instead of refining radium, it started refining uranium for bombs. And they simply used the leftovers from the radium processing originally. The actual mine, the Port Radium mine, didn't really start up again until after the war was over. But the production of that mine and other mines went into the war machine straight away, even though there was no war. Oh, by the way, Port Hope, Ontario, which is a very pretty little town, and this is the harbor, and that's the uranium hexafluoride conversion facility right on the harbor. And on the other side of that is Lake Ontario. And this town is now subject to the most expensive environmental cleanup operation in Canadian history, estimated at more than $2 billion. They're going to be retrieving more than 800,000 tons of radioactive waste from ravines around town, from landfill that was used. Even roads are going to have to are being dug up. Homes are being demolished, and the foundations are being dug up because of radioactive contamination. The entire harbor here is going to be ringed with steel plates, and they're going to dredge the harbor. And all of this nuclear waste is then going to be simply repackaged and put into temporary storage just a few miles north of the town itself, in a facility which is intended to last for 500 years. These wastes have a lifetime measured in many thousands of years. Now, why do we convert our uranium to hexafluoride? Hexafluoride happens to be one of the only compounds of uranium. Uranium is the heaviest naturally occurring element in nature, and one of the few compounds that actually forms a gas at relatively low temperatures is uranium hexafluoride. It's a terrible substance chemically. It's very corrosive. It reacts very violently with water and with air in case there's any kind of spill. And it also gives off neutron radiation because of the fact that you have an alpha emitter and a very light atom, fluorine. It gives off actually neutron radiation, as well as all the other forms of radiation. The reason for this is so that you can enrich it. And we do not have enrichment facilities, never have had enrichment facilities in Canada. And you know what happened to Iran when Iran tried to get enrichment facilities. Not very welcome in the world community. Because if you can enrich uranium, you can make an atomic bomb. All you have to do is enrich it long enough. It takes a long time, however. It's not a fast operation. It takes years. After years of operation, at the end of World War II, the United States only had enough highly enriched uranium for one bomb. So it's not fast. At any rate, this is an enrichment plant. These enrichment plants, this is a gaseous diffusion plant now shut down in Portsmouth in the States. And these gaseous diffusion plants are the largest industrial structures on the face of the earth. And they also require an enormous amount of coal-fired or fossil fuel-fired energy generally to run them. This plant requires as much energy to run as a large city. And its sole purpose is to enrich uranium. And that enriched uranium is, if it's enriched to a low degree, then it can be used in most of the American light water reactors and other reactors around the world. The Canadian reactor doesn't need enriched uranium, actually, but 85% of our uranium is exported. And consequently, it's turned into hexafluoride and exported. The Canadian reactors do not need enriched uranium because we use a very special substance called heavy water, which is such an efficient neutron moderator that you don't need that extra little boost of reactivity that you get from enrichment. And so we don't have that. Strangely enough, if everybody were using the Canadian CANDU reactors, there wouldn't need to be any enrichment at all. But I'm not promoting that idea, mind you, but it is a fact. It is a fact. Now, everybody, when they think about enriched uranium, everybody thinks about what comes out the front door of the enrichment plant, which is the enriched material. But they forget about what goes out the back door. The back door are these cylinders of what is called depleted uranium. One end is enriched, the other end is depleted. And it turns out that for every 5 tons of uranium that Canada exports, only 1 ton finds its way to the customer. The other 4 tons ends up in the backyard of the enrichment plant as depleted uranium. And that depleted uranium is forfeited because Canada doesn't want it back. And so it reverts to American property. And that depleted uranium is not only used in depleted uranium munitions, which you have heard about, no doubt, but you may not realize that for many decades, that depleted uranium has also been used as the primary feedstock for producing the plutonium for the H-bombs in the U.S. military arsenal. It turns out, 5 minutes already? My God. That's terrible. Okay, it turns out that when a U-238, this is uranium-238, when a U-238 atom is struck by a neutron, it becomes a little heavier and undergoes a couple of internal changes and becomes plutonium-239. And so really, it started off as a uranium atom, now it's a plutonium atom. And plutonium is a more powerful nuclear explosive than uranium-235. So in order to enrich the uranium, they have to separate out that U-238 and put it in the backyard. The military can then take that U-238 and put it into special reactors called plutonium production reactors and use it to breed plutonium and that's exactly what they do. So it really shows you that there isn't really a separation between the peaceful atom and the military atom, and never really has been. I'm really out of time, so I'm going to have to quickly jump forward to say a word about Quebec now, which is very important.
Take some more time. Give us more time. More time.
Oh dear. I ran out of time, it looks like. There we are. Yeah, I'm sorry that I didn't get to Quebec sooner. I should have. This is a map of Quebec showing the exploration sites of just a few years ago, a couple of years ago in 2013. And you can see that all over Quebec, this is a huge province, and all over Quebec there are sites where there are mineralizations. And because the price of uranium was artificially high, the reason it was artificially high was because of all the hype about a nuclear renaissance which never materialized. It wasn't even materializing long before the Fukushima disaster. You can't blame this on the Fukushima disaster. That just made things worse. But it wasn't happening before either. But the prices went up so high that all these little companies that are not mining companies but just exploration companies, they say, wow, let's get in there and find some uranium and then we can sell it to a mining company and make a killing. And our laws are so archaic in Quebec and in Canada generally that people can just go on the internet and look at a map of Quebec and stake a claim. They can just simply circle a territory that hasn't been staked by anybody else and say, I stake this claim. And this is like the Wild West. And they don't even have to tell the government what they're exploring for. So the government doesn't even have to know what it is they're looking for. And the property rights of the people who may live there is totally disregarded. The mineral rights are what they're after, and they have apparently the legal right to walk right in there and do that. One group from Sept-Îles, which is near the North Shore there. Sept-Îles is right up near the Gulf of St. Lawrence on the North Shore, and that's where a lot of medical doctors signed a letter, 23 of them I think, signed a letter saying that, an open letter to the Minister of Natural Resources in Quebec saying that if you do not ban uranium mining, we are going to quit our jobs and leave this community and possibly even leave the province. Because we feel that this is a health issue and we feel that you must ban uranium mining. Meanwhile, the Cree in northern Quebec in the EU Ishchi territory, which is Cree territory, guaranteed to them by the James Bay Agreement that they have considerable say over, not total sovereignty, but considerable say. They impose a permanent moratorium on uranium mining in their territory, which is not negotiable, which is for good. And other communities, for example, in the Haute-Laurentide, Francois Lapierre, who's here today, did a very good job of mobilizing the community there. And this mobilization from various parts of Quebec came together. At one point, they even staked a claim on the grass of the National Assembly, the front yard of the National Assembly, and set up they said, well, look, we've staked a legal claim. Here's the papers. We're going to explore here. Just to dramatize how ridiculous these laws are. At any rate, due to a lot of hard work and imagination and cooperation and exuberance on the part of many talented people, Quebec has got to the point where we have not only shut down the only operating nuclear reactor in Quebec, Quebec is the first jurisdiction in North America to phase completely out of nuclear power production, but also we have But we also have achieved a temporary moratorium on uranium mining, which was such a disappointment to the company Stratico that wanted to mine right in Mount Otish, which is, Mount Otish is right up there near Mississauga, and it's not only the geographical center of Quebec and the hydrological center of Quebec, but in many ways it's also the spiritual center of Quebec. It's a sacred mountain, and this is where they wanted to mine for uranium. Imagine, you got all these rivers running to James Bay and running south. Gosh, what could be better? You can just wash that radioactive contamination wherever you want. At any rate, they gave up. Stratico moved out of town even before it came to the public hearings on uranium, which have already concluded, and the Bureau des Audiences Publiques is going to be giving its report just next month in May, and we're hoping that that report may be calling on the government to ban uranium mining from the province of Quebec, which would make us the third province in Canada to ban uranium mining, the other two being British Columbia and Nova Scotia, also due to similar grassroots action, of course. So we're really having this World Uranium Symposium and the consequent Uranium Film Festival at a very important point in time. And I would like you all to be aware of the fact that this is really an historical moment, and that we may succeed in getting the country that is known to the world as being one of the biggest exporters of uranium ever. Up until 5 years ago, we were the largest producer and exporter of uranium in the entire world. Kazakhstan has taken over in that position more recently. But we will have the distinction of having 3 of our 10 provinces having banned uranium, and we're well on our way towards making that stick in other parts of Canada as well, perhaps in other parts of the world. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Ugo. That's a very important point. There are actually 2 things that must be said. Yeah, the question is, what is the significance of the visit tomorrow of Prime Minister Modi of India, who is going to be, apparently the plan is to have a raucous reception for him in Toronto of both supporters and protesters. The background to this story is that in the early years of the nuclear program in Canada, Canada gave India a free nuclear reactor as a gift of goodwill to help them on their way towards this wonderful utopia of the peaceful atom. India subsequently used that reactor, which was a clone of the NRX reactor at Chalk River. They used that reactor to produce plutonium, and they used that plutonium to make a bomb, and they exploded that bomb in the Rajasthan desert in 1974. Whereupon Canada broke off all nuclear cooperation with India, and this gave rise actually to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and to many of the things that we now take for granted. But the Harper government has now decided, just last year, 2 years ago, they've decided to let bygones be bygones. And even though India has not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, even though India has acquired a nuclear arsenal with using Canadian technology, at least in part, even though they have no intention of renouncing that arsenal or even promising not to build more nuclear weapons, Canada wants to sell them uranium. And Cameco is looking forward, Harper wants to sell them uranium, and Cameco, which owes the Canadian government up to $1.5 billion in unpaid back taxes, is looking forward eagerly towards signing lucrative contracts. So our government, the Harper government, is wanting to reward this private company, which is a rogue company that's been dodging taxes and engaged in a dirty business, to sell uranium to a country that has thumbed its nose at the Non-Proliferation Treaty. In doing so, Canada is really making a mockery of the Non-Proliferation Treaty in the following sense. that all the other countries in the world who have signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and that's most of them, would say to themselves, what kind of fools are we? Why do we bother signing this treaty? The only reason for signing this treaty was so that we could get things like uranium purchases and nuclear technology, and now India's getting all this without ever signing the treaty. So this treaty is a sham. So we feel that this motion this action by the Harper government is a serious undermining of the entire international non-proliferation regime. And the Non-Proliferation Treaty is being reviewed in New York City just in a few weeks. And that's the review conference. And what more could Harper do to thumb his nose at the Non-Proliferation Treaty than to conclude a deal with this situation? I'm not blaming India so much on this. At least India, I don't blame India in the sense that at least India is not hypocritical. They didn't sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty because those who did sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, they are hypocritical. The USA, the Russia, France, Britain, they've signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, but they don't mean it because the Non-Proliferation Treaty says they have to get rid of their nuclear weapons. India said, we will not sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty because we do not believe that this treaty is serious. And now Harper is basically doing what he can to apparently chime in and say, no, we don't believe in it either. There's one other thing I want to say, though, and that is in the context of our neighbor, Ontario. Ontario is really where nuclear power is in Canada. The only reason there were any reactors outside of Ontario was a bribe from the federal government to try and get other provinces on board, so that it didn't look like they were spending $17 billion of federal tax money on the nuclear industry solely for the benefit of one province. So what they did was they made an offer to Quebec and to New Brunswick that if they built a nuclear reactor, they would pay half the cost just to get the ball rolling. And that's why we had a nuclear reactor in Quebec, and that's why they have a nuclear reactor in New Brunswick. But really, the 22 nuclear reactors in Ontario, that's really the nuclear industry in Canada. And one of the things that is imminent right now with the Premier's meeting here in just next door, with the Premier's meeting to talk about climate change and what can be done about it, we're hoping that Quebec, which now has at this moment very large surpluses of excess hydropower, doesn't require building any new dams or anything of that sort, that if they can sell some of that power to Ontario, they can allow Ontario to shut down their Darlington nuclear reactor without having to refurbish it. Already the Pickering reactors, 8 of them, are going to be totally shut down by 2020, which is only 5 years away. And if the Darlington 4 reactors were shut down as well, that would mean 12 reactors gone from the scene in Canada. That would be a big major accomplishment. So we are calling on the Quebec government and the Ontario government to cooperate in a mutually advantageous deal. Quebec can get more money than they're currently getting by exporting it to the States if they sell to Ontario, and Ontario can save a lot more money than they would spend in refurbishing those old reactors. So we, the thing that we have to do as citizens of the world is to really keep our eye open for opportunities where we might be able to make a bit of a difference. And I think that if all of us were only to do that, that we would be well on our way towards getting a solution to most of our more urgent problems. I never thought, to tell you the honest truth, I've been anti-nuclear for many, many years. I never thought I would see the day when nuclear power has been declining from 17% of world electricity in 2005 to 11% and still going down today, whereas renewable sources of energy are just booming and going through the roof. This is really a hopeful sign. And we should go away from this conference with renewed conviction that we really have all the technical knowledge we need to do the right thing. We just lack the political and social will. We don't need global consciousness. We've got it. What we need is global willpower.